Hi, I'm Susan Winter in the College of Information Studies at the University of Maryland.
I am Nick Berente. I'm at the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame.
And I'm Joel Cutcher-Gershenfeld at the Heller School for Social Policy and Management at Brandeis University.
And I'm John King at the University of Michigan School of Information. And yes, I got a haircut. Joel?
Thanks, John. What I'm going to do is share my screen. As we always do, we like to start with a short video. This is a video clip on making the leap to large, which again, with all of our video clips, we're delighted to share with you and post at our website for your use.
Making the leap from a small scientific project to a large NSF science and engineering initiative is a considerable undertaking. Take scientist Lucy, for example. She does computational chemistry and is making the leap to large. Lucy has identified her key stakeholders and the value propositions that her project offers them. Lucy has also generated impact metrics that match the diverse interests of her key stakeholders, tracking intellectual merits and broader impacts. Lucy will hire a project manager, but her leap to large needs more than project management. She needs to be a project leader. As a project leader, she knows she needs to develop a collaborative team culture with a strong focus on transformational impact. To do this, she needs to develop a common vision, mission, and goals. She needs to strive for a culture of continuous improvement. Nothing in graduate school or Lucy's career prepared her to shape the culture of a complex research enterprise spanning many universities and diverse disciplines. What can Lucy do about the culture for an entire research enterprise? A transformational leader shouldn't micromanage. She must empower her team so they are all working toward the common vision, mission, and goals. Lucy will need to develop and use key performance indicators to drive an enterprise that delivers on efficiency and effectiveness, building continuous improvement into her research operations. At the same time, however, she needs to support her team and model behavior to be flexible and open to change, driving an agile enterprise that delivers on innovation. Successful leaders strike a balance between efficiency and agility. This is not a one-off activity, but a continual accomplishment. To navigate this balancing act, Lucy also needs to know herself, her strengths and blind sides. She needs to be clear on the ethical underpinnings of her research. She embraces project leadership, not just project management. She is no longer just managing science and engineering projects, she is leading. In making the leap to large, you too can accomplish better, more impactful research, aligning diverse stakeholders for success and forging a high-impact culture that enables large-scale science and engineering. So, let's focus on what you need to know about project leadership.
Needless to say, it's a delight to put these videos together for you, and we indeed hope that they will be useful to you. And needless to say also, the slides that we're sharing are all visible to you on the website.
Joel, just a quick note that we're going to be updating the PDF that we have loaded because it has some format issues. So
Okay. So the PDF will be updated after this session. And this sequence is going to be slightly different. But Susan, go ahead. You want to give us the overview?
Certainly. So today we're talking about project leadership. This is session 4. So this is the midpoint. We'll have the welcome, the overview and video, a little bit on the pre-session survey and what you all were telling us you wanted help with and did well. Part of our challenge today is because leaders are busy and their schedules are difficult to align. We have a number of videos from people who couldn't be here in person, the first of which is with the U.S. Representative Bill Foster. who is actually on the House Science and Technology Committee, which has complete jurisdiction over the National Science Foundation. Then we also have a video from University of Michigan Regent Kathy White about her experience with leadership. We have some material about project leadership with some question and answer, and Coach Muffet McGraw from Notre Dame, and one of the most winningest coaches, I think, in the history of women's basketball. And a bit of a handoff with Neil Gershenfeld, who runs the Atoms to Bits initiative and Fab Labs with the town hall style Q&A, and then segue into data management for next week.
Thanks, Susan. And it's with that in mind that we want to give you just a quick overview of what you said. Each time we do this, we send out a pre-session survey. In fact, I encourage all of you to respond to the survey. Not only does it inform what we do, but it will be part of the feedback to the NSF on what this community of folks who are researchers looking to make the leap to large are thinking. We did hear from 156 of you. We sent the survey out to everyone who registered. And based on your responses, we learned, of course, that many of you have led small or medium projects. That's the chart on the left. Very few of you have led larges, which is our target audience. Notice the chart on the left, though. This breakdown we're going to use to break down some of your responses later on in the workshop. So we'll be interested to see whether more experience with even smalls and mediums leads to differences in views, and you'll see that it does. A number of you who responded were at session 3. If you weren't, a number of you said you would watch the video. And by the way, a number of you have watched the session 1 or session 2 recordings. So we appreciate that the hub is being used and you all have access to it. In terms of just looking back on session 3, the number one thing that you said was important was the value of storytelling. But you also valued connecting metrics and strategic planning, which we're going to go further on today. You also appreciated the guidance on performance metrics, as well as how to communicate them, as well as getting stakeholder value clear, and the iterative process that we heard about from John Towns around developing metrics. There were other things that were important, but those were the things that you said were most valuable to you. Looking ahead, we also asked you whether we should do breakout groups. We did so in the first 2 sessions, and of course, we ran up against the very limit of Zoom to 50 breakout rooms. And a good 2/3 of you said no, keep it in this full seminar kind of format, which we will do for today. It may be that in future sessions where it's appropriate, we may do targeted use of breakouts in a way that isn't as complicated as using multiple Zoom accounts as we tried to do previously. But we hear you, and we will be operating that way today. So to get the stage set for our discussion of project leadership, there were a number of things that you said you were good at. You were good at learning from your mistakes, at articulating a compelling vision, supporting flexibility and agility. These were all things that at least half of you said that you were good at. But at the same time, quite a few of you said you wanted to develop further your skills to connect vision, mission, and goals and articulate a compelling vision, and that will be on the agenda today. You wanted to learn more about teamwork, and in the workforce session coming up, we will certainly talk more about that. But on this issue of efficiency and effectiveness and a culture of continuous improvement, again, many of you, about half of you said that you wanted to develop skills on that, and we will. And we'll do a little bit more on flexibility and agility. The point here is that some of these things that you've highlighted will be in the next 2 sessions. A number of them are literally the agenda for today. And so with that, let me end the show and have Susan tell us a little bit more about Bill Foster, and then we'll show you the custom message that he's prepared just for this session.
Thank you. Yeah, Bill Foster is a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Illinois' 11th District. Has a very interesting background. At the age of 19, as an undergraduate, he co-founded a company with his brother called Electronic Theater Controls. It was quite successful. Then went and got a PhD in physics from Harvard, spent 22 years at Fermilab in high energy particle physics as a fellow of the American Physical Society and won multiple prizes for his work in physics. Then in 2008 was elected to the US House of Representatives and serves on the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, which I said has jurisdiction over NSF, and serves on the investigation and oversight subcommittee of that body. So if you have a large, if you're successful in winning a large and there are problems with managing it, that's the part of the House of Representatives that pays attention to that, and also serves on the subcommittee on research and technology, and was kind enough to record a little bit for us about his role in science oversight and the U.S. representatives.
Thank you, Susan. And yeah, we were thrilled when we contacted Representative Foster's staff that he agreed to do this. He knows that there's a community of folks who want to make the leap to large, and here's what he has to say.
Hello, I'm Congressman Bill Foster. I'm a scientist and businessman, and I represent the 11th Congressional District of Illinois in the United States House of Representatives. I sometimes introduce myself as saying that I represent 100% of the strategic reserve of physicists in the United States Congress. Before I ran for Congress, I spent 23 years at Fermi National Accelerator Lab as a high-energy particle physicist and accelerator designer, where I collaborated on scientific projects large and small with scientists from labs around the U.S. and around the world, each of whom dealt with their quaint and curious funding agencies. In the U.S. Congress, we may be at a point of unique opportunity where a number of factors seem to have converged in a Sputnik-like moment that may allow a historic increase in research budgets. COVID-19, climate change, AI and quantum computing, competition from China, and other forces have come together to generate a once-in-a-generation level of public support for academic research. Even prior to COVID, on the House Science Committee on which I serve, we had dueling Democratic and Republican proposals to double scientific research budgets. President Biden on the campaign trail would oscillate between an aspirational doubling or tripling of research budgets and found that it was an applause line. Support was so great that it even became obvious to the United States Senate, which normally makes itself known as a place for good ideas to die. So this doubling, if it occurs, will take place partly by increasing the number and diversity of projects funded, and partly by increasing the size of existing grants and projects. So I want to welcome you to Session 4 of the National Science Foundation's Make the Leap to Large programming, focused on project leadership. With greater budgets come greater responsibilities, greater complications, and greater reporting requirements. And it is important to understand the road ahead to succeed and to contribute to the overall success and reputation of our nation's scientific enterprise. Driving a large-scale research project requires skills that are outside the scope of solitary research, including developing a shared vision, resolving conflict, and recruiting and retaining talent. And that's why I'm glad that the National Science Foundation is holding workshops such as this one, helping lead researchers to develop the skills and access the resources necessary to successfully expand their projects. I hope you learn a lot today and take advantage of this opportunity. Thank you all, and keep up the good work.
Well,
Hey.
say, John, go ahead.
You might have noticed a few things in Representative Foster's comments. To his colleagues in the House of Representatives, he refers to himself as a physicist. But to us, he's a high-energy particle physicist. There's a difference between those two things. Everybody in science is interested in pursuing the science that they do. That's often more narrow, more specific, etc. But when you get to the Congress, that's kind of a wash. They don't think about that. He says that even before COVID-19, there was a Sputnik-like moment that was forming in the House, where there was bipartisan support for doubling or even tripling the amount of money that goes into scientific research. I think that's very important too. We have experience with doubling scientific research budgets in the National Institutes for Health. After that happened, the average size and duration of grants went down. The competition actually went up because people knew there was more money and they made proposals. So learning how to run a large project is valuable. Now, if you use the Q&A feature, which should be available to you, you can come up with some questions and comments and so forth that you would like to pass on with respect to Representative Foster's observations. We don't have a lot of time for this, but we're able to entertain a few.
And I'm going to share the screen as we're talking.
We do have a comment from one participant, shocked to hear that academics provide things at the last minute. I mean, how unheard of is that?
Yeah. Well, if there are no
So,
further comments,
one of the
move on
questions,
to
one of the
chapter one.
questions, John, was about the timescale and discussion, the timescale and duration of budget increases. Do we have any sense, maybe John and Susan, for how long will it take for the Biden administration, if they were to focus on these things and get them passed? How long are we going to see increased budgets this year?
Well, as part of the Endless Frontier proposal from Senator Schumer and Senator Young, there would be a very substantial increase in NSF funding, but that hasn't passed yet. So I don't know when this would happen. There was a substantial additional increase for research funding in the jobs program, the COVID relief program. I don't know what's happening with that either. But I think what Representative Foster was getting at was there's a very strong mobilization of bias as a result of all the things that are happening. And that's probably going to lead to more funding.
And the key thing here is that when you think of your stakeholders, Congress, and in the body here of Representative Foster, is a stakeholder for large-scale science and engineering projects. And so you can literally have him in mind as you go forward.
So,
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I think we're ready. It's back to you.
Another question from online. My understanding is that they plan to add a new technology directorate. I don't know if anybody knows about this, which means the increase will likely go mainly in this new direction rather than increasing fundamental research funding. Do we know anything about this, John?
It's not far enough along. People are motivated by the returns on the investments they make. So when you think of stakeholders, sure, Representative Foster is a stakeholder, but he's also a scientist. He understands something about doing science. We also need to think of the stakeholders who are his colleagues, but are not scientists. The people who look at science and say, yeah, I like that. That has good returns, but I'm interested in the returns.
So at this point, I think we should pause and move on to the next thing. There's probably room for more discussion on any questions that people have in a little bit, because as part of this journey, I think we need to come back, John, to you to actually introduce our next video.
Sure. This is a video by Regent Kathy White from the University of Michigan. Now, those of you who are familiar with the University of Michigan probably know that the fight song has a line in it. The University of Michigan is the leaders and best. So it's actually fairly common at the University of Michigan for people to talk about leadership. Now, I and a colleague taught a course on leadership several years ago. And we were surprised to discover that many of the students who took the course thought, well, if I'm taking a course on leadership, at the end of the course, I'm a leader. And we said, no, that's not really how it works. So we went to Regent White to record a video for us that we use in that class and other classes, and we're going to play that for you now.
It'll just take a minute for me to key that up.
Hi, I'm Kathy White. I'm a member of the University of Michigan Board of Regents. In my professional career, I'm a lawyer and a law professor. I'm also a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army Reserves in the Judge Advocate General's Corps. Leadership is important to everyone at the University of Michigan. We are, after all, the leaders and best. I'm glad you're taking this class on leadership. As an Army Reservist, I have taught constitutional and military law at West Point, where leadership is a constant and persistent topic. In my experience, it is far easier to talk about leadership than it is to lead. A leader has to motivate people, influence people, and make decisions for the good of the organization, and not for personal gain. Leaders value being part of something greater than themselves. In order to be effective, a leader must have knowledge in order to understand actions that need to be taken. Leaders must be able to explain information and relay their ideas and objectives. But a leader's influence is directly proportional to the influence they have on others. If you are not influential, you will have difficulty being able to accomplish anything. So basically, leadership is influence. But sometimes influence comes from a variety of sources, not just from your rank or your position. Over time, we've learned two things about leadership that are relevant to this class. First, leadership is earned. We don't teach leadership the same way we teach arithmetic or spelling. We don't know how to teach people to be leaders. We wish we did. It would make things a lot easier. Instead, we give people opportunities to lead. Thus, courses on leadership help strengthen leadership skills, but real leaders have to step up. This class helps. But there are no guarantees. Much depends on the individual. Do not expect your instructors to make you into leaders. Leadership is earned. Second, to be a good leader, you must be a good follower. Leaders must understand following or they can't lead. Those who would lead must learn to follow. This is the beginning of a true leadership ability. Enjoy the class and go blue.
So you can see that there was an opportunity there for a little advertisement, which of course the people at the University of Michigan like. But the two takeaways at the end there, I think are important for this. Now the first one, which is actually the second one in the video, but it's the first one, is following. I don't think most of the people attending this session need instructions on following. They've learned how to be good followers. They're ready to be good leaders. But the other issue that leadership is earned, that's kind of an important issue. She says just prior to that we don't know how to teach leadership like we teach arithmetic or spelling. And I think that's true. We wish we did. It would be easier. We could just provide that for people. Instead, what we try to do is boil down some of the essence of leadership so that people can build on that base. That's what we're going to try to do today.
Super. And what I'm going to do is come back to share my screen. In a minute, we want to take you into some ways to think about this, but we'll pause just for a second if there are any questions in chat or that people have. And
So
if
there is
not,
a question in one of the chats. It's not in the Q&A, but the question is, how does NSF incentivize leadership in its metrics when funding projects? Academia seems to most incentivize individual achievements, which seems to ultimately discourage leadership that involves thinking of the best for the group. From my perspective, this seems to be a perennial issue in academia.
Yeah, I'd like to actually comment on that just for a minute, because there is a disconnect between incentives that motivate individual success versus incentives that motivate the collective enterprise. And so in some way, leading a large-scale science and engineering project, you have to create and align incentives that foster the importance of the whole in a context that doesn't reward that. So you're actually working upstream against some embedded parts of the incentives in the organization. And we'll be getting into that a little further, but your question is important because sometimes you have to name the disconnect before you can then address it.
So the other thing I'd like to add to that is last week, our speaker was John Towns at Illinois. And John Towns, as we know, has been the director of Exceed, the PI for Exceed, which is $250 million NSF funded project. And he's a strong leader that was rewarded very well in academia, right? So I think the premise that we don't reward leadership, collaboration, and large-scale impact beyond individual achievements maybe is not always true, that premise, right?
This is also a time of transition. I think that many people are kind of freaked out by the fact that things seem to be changing for science, just like they're changing in many other aspects of the society. But I think that change is real. And people have to get used to the changes, even though a lot of the people who are in charge of the processes that are changing are not exactly sure what they're doing.
John, can you comment about, there's a question in the Q&A about teaching leadership at the University of Michigan, if there are best practices in terms of the gender dynamics and research leadership, women and BIPOC leadership roles?
Well, I think it almost goes without saying that there are important differences between people. Some people are kind of what we call natural leaders. They kind of have acquired the ability to see things through their experiences and so forth. It might even be due to nature, I don't really know. But what you're trying to do in a classroom, and this class on leadership had about 250 people in it, is try to provide things that most of them get. And the first lesson that we found really valuable to people was that we don't know how to just hook you up to an IV and have you come out a leader. We don't know how to do that. We put you in interesting positions, and quite frequently, they would respond in kind of predictable ways. And we'd say, well, you responded in predictable ways. This is what you said. So those became teachable moments. I would say that the most important outcome of this at the undergraduate level was that people were aware that leadership is important, but it's also difficult to master. At the graduate level, people kind of know that already. They're beginning to look for tools and techniques and some things that we're going to provide today when we talk about vision and so forth.
So with that said, perhaps we should move on to the next segment.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. So so we'll talk to you now about project leadership, because as John and Kathy White indicated, we can't really teach leadership. So if you can't teach leadership, what will we talk about today? So that's our challenge. And why is leadership important? Well, leadership is important because when you leap to a large, you can no longer be directly in control of everything that goes on in the project. You need to delegate, and you need to trust other people to act on behalf of the best interests of the project and to dedicate their time, right? So some of this, and we're going to talk about the management versus leadership, but some of it is leadership. It's influence. It's getting people to do things on their own where maybe you're not overseeing them. So next slide, please. And as we talked about, and there was actually a comment in the chat that asked about this, but when we leap to a large, we're looking for broader impact as well as greater, more transformational science impact. But we're looking at the leaders of larges to be able to express not only stories, but in metrics, their impact across not just science and engineering, but also the workforce, economic, and innovation dimensions. So when we ask people to do this, we don't expect a naive, short-term view, kind of like the caricature of corporate America's view of ROI, as if we know what we want to do and now we're just going to measure it and deliver it. We understand that in transformational science, we don't always know where this is going to head. We need to be open to unexpected occurrences. We need to capture those unexpected occurrences and, of course, communicate them well. But at the same time, we can't just set up a project, set up milestones, and deliver. So this means that it's not just a matter of management. It's not just a matter of project management. It's a matter of leadership. And it's a matter of leadership and being flexible and open to unintended consequences. The idea of a leader is to be able to inspire and align and influence multiple individuals on your team to go in the same direction and to use their own discretion to move that direction forward. So you're not in charge, you're in many ways coaching. So we can't teach this. Leadership is something that some people do instinctively, and some people can learn over time. But as Kathy White indicated, sometimes just stepping up, right? Stepping up, being a good follower is a start. And then when people are put into positions of leadership, they do it. The one thing I want to go at before we get to this and why leadership is important, and I love the quote from Representative Foster where he said, with greater budgets come greater responsibilities, right? So this leader in transform, with a large budget, we're expecting transformational science. We're expecting a lot from this person, and this person is not going to be able to do it all. Now, again, we can't teach leadership, but what we can do is we can look at the research, and we have decades and decades of research on leadership now. And we realize that although it's hard to teach it, one thing we found is that if people engage in the behaviors that they find other transformational leaders doing, if they essentially imitate them, then over time, they'll work their way towards becoming a transformational leader themselves, right? And over the decades, there's been a general agreement on six general behaviors that leaders, the transformational leaders, engage in. So if I were to attempt to become a leader now, I would want to engage in these behaviors, and then over time they become instinctive, and I do become a transformational leader. The first is transformational leaders are visioning, right? They develop and articulate an aspirational view of future situations. Right? It's about where are we heading? Where's true north? Where's the direction? And they're very much focused on visioning. The other thing is that they're goal focused, not just in their own activity, but in the activities of others. And it's not just setting the goals, but it's maintaining buy-in into those goals. It's continually working with all of the stakeholders, all of the team members, to make sure everybody's focused on the goals that support that direction that was articulated by the vision. High expectations. This is one thing a lot the transformational leaders have in common is they expect high quality and excellence and will accept nothing less. Now, hand in hand with the high expectations are the modeling. Transformational leaders do not simply tell people to do things, but yet they act. So if you expect excellence, what you do also represents excellence. You model the behaviors you expect from your team. If you expect everyone to wake up early in the morning and communicate, you will be waking up early in the morning and communicating. So it's not just a matter of having high expectations for your team. It's a matter of modeling those behaviors for your teammates, right? So they find they do that. The other is they support their team. It's more about coaching and less about ordering people around, right? And one thing they found through a lot of research is it's not just supporting the team in general, it's individualized support. Understanding each team member, understanding what will make each team member excel, what barriers are there in the way of each team member, eliminating the barriers, finding ways to support that team. right? And then the final thing, and I think this is interesting, and it's something that we researchers certainly can appreciate, and that's intellectual stimulation. Transformational leaders find ways to intellectually stimulate their teammates and they keep it fresh. Sticking in the same rut, even in a very transformative project, sometimes those team members may be stuck in ruts, and transformational leaders find ways to stimulate every team member. So the bottom line is, if you learn nothing else today, understand the 6 behaviors of a transformational leader, and that'll begin to take us down that path, right, towards success. So we, excuse me, we looked at one of the questions we asked before the session in the survey. And again, let me just throw a little nod out to, please, those of you who are online, we send a note out to ask you to do the survey. Please do the survey each week. There's only 3 more weeks to go. We'd really appreciate it if each of you did those 3 surveys and spent some time on that. This is helping us not only with these sessions and with future sessions, so we can make sure we give good feedback to NSF, but also it's our research, right? So you can help us with our research as well. So one of the things we found, and this is kind of interesting, is that self-knowledge is very important to these leaders and understanding your own blind sides. And what we found is those folks who have actually worked with larger projects seem to be more aware of their blind sides than those who haven't, which is interesting. So we're not going to address each of the behaviors of a good leader, but we will start with the top 2, right? This whole idea of visioning and then goals, and the idea of mission. So you'll hear it a lot, especially in sort of management circles: vision, mission, goals, vision, mission, goals. And let me just introduce these ideas to you, because I think that, we think that they bring a lot of what we're saying to the fore. There are 3 components that a leader does. They set a vision, they set a mission, and they set key strategic goals. Now, what the vision, mission, and goals do is align people so that they can do, the teammates, so that they can do activity without direct oversight from the leader, and they're still moving in the same direction. So these are critical. A vision sets the true north. So all the incredibly impressive knowledge workers you have on your team don't need you to babysit them. They will move in that direction. And again, this accounts for unintended consequences. Visions are aspirational statements of the desired future. Then a mission is a specific statement about what the enterprise does and how it does it, what its purpose and values. And then finally, the goals are always going to be clear, outcome focused. So next slide. RENCI, the Renaissance Computing Institute, it's a joint group between, I think, Duke and UNC. Stan Ahalt is the director. We've worked with him over the years. We give some examples of RENCI's vision statement, right? This is what they want to do. They want better health, safer environment, improved economic and business successes, and they're doing it with data science. Next slide. Their mission, right? They say what they do. They deploy data science, cyber infrastructure, develop and deploy, and then they do it. And we'll make these slides available. You can read these. So I think they did a good job with their vision, mission, goals. And then finally, their strategic goals. Now, if you look at there's a link here that takes you to their website, and they really detail out these goals. And then underneath the goals, they have objectives. Underneath the objectives, they have activities. They have metrics for all of these things. So that'll give you some idea, but you can see some of their major goals. These are the things that they want to accomplish in their project. And that's a good example for you. We're going to, we see here that it's important and it's difficult for connecting vision, mission, goals. Next slide, please.
Although I will notice that the people who had not done any projects thought it was easier than everybody else who's actually done a project.
Yeah, it's not that easy when you try it. The point, a key point of when we have discussions of leadership is that leadership is not the same thing as management. It's very important to understand this. If we go to the next slide, every large is going to have to hire a project manager. That's a fundamental. When you put in your large proposal, have a project manager on your large proposal. They're going to take care of management. The PI doesn't do this or shouldn't do this. They organize, they track, they monitor, they look for ways to improve. The PI can help, the co-PIs can help, but there should be an explicit project manager who makes sure that you're doing things right, right? Leadership is different. Leadership is setting the direction, looking for ways to coach, support people, eliminate, and align and influence and maintain buy-in. Next slide, please. So one way to look at it is this. The arrows are in the wrong place. I don't know. But the key performance indicators is supposed to point to goals. And then the metrics for each objective is supposed to point to objectives, right? So are you changing it real time? Very good. So what we talked about last time was metrics. All the things you do, all the activities should have objectives, and you should have metrics, and you should be able to tell those stories. Some of these will be story-based metrics, some will be quantitative. For those key strategic goals, of which there are only a few, we need to roll up some of these metrics. Those become key performance indicators. So that's something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So again, the difference between management and leadership. Management is execution, efficiency, continuous improvement, whereas leadership is setting the direction and look for ways to empower your team, sense, adjust, do the right thing. Thanks. So I wonder, are we going to do the poll questions now, or should we introduce?
Maybe we'll do the poll questions afterwards, because we've got our next guest here, right?
Well, is our next guest here?
Yes, she is.
She is. Okay, very good. So so we'll get to the poll questions about vision, mission, goals in a second. But before we go, what I'd like to do is introduce to everybody Coach Muffet McGraw from the University of Notre Dame. Coach McGraw is the legendary coach of Notre Dame's women's basketball team from 1987 to 2020. And Coach McGraw knows a thing or two about leadership. Her team's record during her tenure was 905 to 272, which is 77% winning percentage over 32 seasons. She led her team to 9 Final Fours, 7 championship game appearances, 2 national championships, and she was inducted to the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. She won the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame award in 2017. And in 2016, the John R. Wooden Award Committee recognized Coach McGraw with the 2017 Legends of Coaching Award. And she now teaches at Notre Dame's Mendoza College of Business. So welcome, Coach McGraw, and thanks for your time today.
You bet. Happy to be here.
So we have a couple of questions for you, and we'd like to open it up to and we'll see how long it takes to get through these questions. Excuse me, and we'll open it up to the Q&A. So participants, we have almost 400 participants online right now. If you have questions, hopefully we can get time to them. But one of the things we just talked about was, what is the difference between coaching a team and managing a team? And I wonder if you could speak to that for you.
Well, I think when I hear coaching the team, I think immediately of individual development. How can I make these players better? How can I get them to reach their potential? I have to look at them individually and see, how do they fit within the offense that I'm running? Or how am I going to get the most out of them? What are their strengths and what are their weaknesses? And how do we improve on the weaknesses and play to their strengths? So I think the coaching part is much more on an individual level, getting to know them, having that connection with them, knowing exactly what they need and how they learn. Do they like to watch film? Do they like to actually get on the court and do it? Do they want to see someone else doing it? So I think knowing them really well individually is important. And managing the program, I think that's the kind of overview. I've got to make sure that they're on task. I've got to make sure that we're heading in the right direction, that we're getting everything done, that my staff is doing what they need to do, that the support staff is doing their job, that we're all working together to create this culture in our group that is going to help us be successful.
Wonderful, thank you. So one topic that we've been discussing here is how leaders support each team member individually. And it's kind of like what you said, their strengths, weaknesses. How do you do this though, without playing favorites or giving inordinate attention to a small number of, say, problem team members or your superstars? Like, how do you balance your attention across the team when you're coaching them?
That is such a key thing for women, especially. I think when you're dealing with women, you really have to make sure that everything is equal. And for us, we have rules and everybody follows the same rules, but everybody's not the same. I don't treat everyone the same. And we do something fun at the beginning of the year. And I actually did this in my sports leadership class. I had everyone take the color personality test. And I like that one because there's only 4 colors. So there's a good chance that you're going to have a lot of people they're the same. And I think the thing is, you learn about them and you learn about yourself. I don't know how much you guys deal with this generation, but self-awareness completely lacking in this generation. And so I think it's so important that they kind of learn about themselves. They learn what their strengths and weaknesses are. And then I know how to approach them. There are some that they don't need a constant, you're doing a great job. You know, they don't need the constant building up of their self-esteem and their ego. And then there are others that are very needy. And I think it's up to you as the leader. You have to know, for me, who can I yell at practice? Because some people can't take it. They're a little more sensitive. Who do I need to talk to after the game individually? You know, I always thought in a group setting, of course, you always praise in public, but in private, that's where you get your constructive feedback. So I think it's really important that you have that connection, that you get personal, that you have the empathy to understand what they're going through. And I think that's something that I really learned along the way, because when I started, I was like, my way or the highway, get on the bus, I'll tell you where we're going, and here we go. And these last couple of generations, they don't deal with that exactly the same way. So they need that feedback, constant feedback. And I think honesty, probably the most important trait for me in coaching as a leader. I think that is the one thing. I think you have to be willing to give them that open and honest feedback.
Yeah, that generational issue is certainly something that we have to wrestle with increasingly, right? I don't remember my coach ever being nice to me, ever. So another thing we've been talking about in these sessions with the scientists is that metrics matter, measurement. We use them to understand how we're doing, right? But metrics aren't everything, especially when you can't anticipate what's going to happen. So do you have advice about how metrics how leaders use metrics effectively?
Well, I love stats, and I am that kind of personality trait that loves to get down to the facts and see exactly how we're doing. We have our goals that are all statistical. This is what we want to accomplish every game. You know, we have 10 goals statistically that we're trying to shoot for. Individually, the players have very clear expectations of what their job is. And I think that's so important for the leader to set out those expectations. This is what I need from you. These are the 3 things I need from you every game. And not just to tell that individual player, but I tell them in front of the entire team. So everybody knows what everyone's job is. But there are times when we can't control the outcome. And there are times when the stats aren't really working in our favor for whatever reason. I think what we do then is we go back and we look at our execution. We look at our practice plan. We look and see, how did we get here? Why are we missing? What are we doing wrong? I think that constant looking in the mirror, that constant accountability and a willingness to look and say, you know, maybe we weren't prepared for this. What went wrong? How did it go wrong? After every game, we do this, whether we win or lose, because we're always striving for perfection and we're never going to get there. So if we're in a streak where maybe we've lost a couple of games, that's a time when I'll take the film into my team and show them some highlights. This is what we can do. This is what we have done well. And here's where I think we're missing right now. This is something I think we can fix this. And for me as a leader, I always felt like I have to be able to fix it. I have to go in with a plan. This is what we're going to do in order to turn things around. But I think communication is even more important when you're in a tough times, when you're in a losing streak or things aren't going well. Because if you don't communicate effectively, people build stories in their own head about why things are going wrong. They start to blame each other. And I think that is so important that you are constantly having that open communication and open dialogue.
So, by the way, our Q&A is exploding here with people with questions for you. So that's wonderful. But one of the things that a participant asked is, how do you know, or how do you deal with individuals who think they know better than you and does coaching on the side, right? So this open communication, right? What if then they give you feedback and disagree, especially your stars? You've had many stars over the years, right?
Yeah, we have. And, you know, I think when you look at a championship culture, which is what I'm trying to build here, and what one of those things is, you have to be able to have conflict. And you can only have conflict if you have trust and you have honesty. So I like contact. I like to be challenged. I like to have, and I tell them all the time, you got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We are going to go at it. We're going to disagree on things, but I'm going to listen and I want to know what you think. And I treat my older players, my more experienced players, a lot differently than I do my freshmen. I am much more open to the older players. you have a better idea. Let's hear it. I want to win. I am all for a new idea. Do you think there's a different way to do this? Is there a better way? Absolutely. Let's talk about it. And I think when you have that openness and that trust, you know that you're going to be able to get there. But one of our core values is also unselfishness and team first. And I think you have to realize some people are a little more talented than others, and some people are going to have a little more leeway, and they're going to be able to take more shots or do more in a certain situations. And everybody kind of has to understand what their role is. But I am more than willing to listen to somebody that has a better idea.
Yeah. So you just mentioned talent, and one more question, and then we'll let you go. I know you have a busy day here, but you mentioned talent, and one of the questions from the group was finding the right talent for the team is, of course, difficult. Do you have any pearls of wisdom you could share there from your experience?
I think recruiting is the most important thing that I do. And I'm not just talking about my team, I'm talking about my staff as well. So for me, we have our core values and, honesty, accountability, commitment to excellence, humility, and certainly we want people that are unselfish. So the first thing I do is I look at what kind of person are they? Because there are a lot of great players out there. And I don't want to coach all of them because I want the ones that really are interested in team and want to win. So I get to know them first and get to know what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? I want them to want to be All-Americans, but at the same time within the team framework. I think when you're recruiting your staff, it's so important to get those complementary pieces. I think I'm good at vision and setting things up and establishing what our goals are. I need some people that are going to do different things. So I want somebody that's going to be super organized that can take care of the scheduling. I need somebody that's going to be really upbeat and positive because I tend to catastrophize every situation. I need somebody around me that's going to be really good at individual workouts. I want them to kind of fit into my weaknesses. I do not want somebody to come in and agree with me on everything we talk about. I need that conflict and I want to be challenged. So I think it's important to get pieces that fit together. Everybody has a strength. And when we all come together, that's the synergy we have to create our championship culture. And you wouldn't recruit all 3-point shooters on a team. You need some point guards, you need some big guys, you need different kind of people, and you have that personality that you're trying to get to where you have that connection and that passion for the game. So I think there's so much that goes into that, but I always tell my assistants and my players who go off to be head coaches, the most important thing you do is hire your staff. Well,
Coach McGraw, I think I speak for everyone when I say this was wonderful. Thank you so much for joining our little discussion on leadership today. Really
I'm always happy to hear about leadership. My sports leadership class is always looking for new ideas, so would love to talk about it further.
Anytime. Great. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick.
Take care. Bye-bye. So, Joel, that was wonderful, and luckily, anything we're talking about doesn't necessarily contradict what Coach McGraw was saying, right? I think she's
very, very complimentary.
Totally unscripted, so that was fun.
Yeah. Do you want to quickly do the polls? I know we have.
Yes, I think we should. So we're going to do polls right now, just around vision, mission, goals. And it's good vision, bad vision, good mission, bad mission. We'll see how much you were paying attention before Coach McGraw came on. So please tell us which of these is a better vision statement than the others for our project, our large-scale project, to research security issues in quantum computing. Is that a good vision? This brings some of the world's brightest thinkers together to solve some of the world's most important problems around secure quantum computing. Or the last one, to make quantum computing secure.
And it looks like we've got about 200 people that have responded. So do you want to show the results?
Show the results. Let's do it.
Okay. Here's the results.
Ooh, interesting. So the right answer actually was the last one, right? To make quantum computing secure. Remember, this is the vision. This is aspirational. It's the true north. We're all going in the direction of, this, and it's a stretch goal, right? We know I, myself, and my team aren't going to make it secure, but that's the direction we're going. Brings the brightest thinkers to solving problems around secure. That's, first of all, it's more of a mission. It says what we do, but it's a lot of fluffy language, right? The whole idea to a vision is to be concise. If you get a chance, go look online at, Google's vision, at Disney's vision, right? These are 4 words sometimes, right? They're short, they're concise, they're aspirational, right?
So let's go on to the next one.
Good. Now this is mission. Indicate which would be a better mission of the 3. To ensure quantum computing through advancements in machine learning. To ensure secure quantum computing through advancements in machine learning. To conduct research into machine learning approaches to secure quantum computing in the context of tensor network architectures with quantum generative adversarial algorithms. Or to explore the frontiers of secure quantum computing. What do you think?
We've got almost 200 results in, actually more than that now, and we're seeing a clear pattern.
Let's pull the trigger.
Here we go.
All right, we got it. You did it right. It's what are you doing and how? We're securing quantum computing with advancements in machine learning, right? It gives us the domain and what we're doing. The second one is bad because we're talking about tensor network architecture. We're getting really into the weeds. You don't want to necessarily get into the weeds in your mission statement, at least not your main mission statement. Now, if there are other things you want to have, that's fine. But these are the technologies. Keep it somewhat simple. And then, again, you're not saying how you're doing it with exploring the frontiers of secure quantum computing. So,
okay, one more.
Now this is this a good goal? To have the world's best performance for noisy intermediate scale quantum computing that leverages the variational quantum. You can read the rest. The second one, to achieve and maintain world-class levels of computing performance. And the final one, to achieve and maintain world-class levels of computing performance as measured by an index of 3 tests in computing performance as a KPI.
Well, looks like we've got quite a few results coming in. There we go.
Oh, interesting. All right. So clearly when it's this wrong, there was something wrong that the teacher did, right? We mentioned the KPI in the goal. You don't do that. The KPI is the measure of the goal. It is not the goal. The goal is to achieve and maintain world-class levels of computer performance. That's it. The way you measure it is perhaps using the 3 tests or whatever, an index as a KPI, right? You have to keep the measurement separate from the goal. The goal is, in plain language, right? A KPI is a measure of the goal. So this was a good learning moment, I suppose. And I guess we didn't clarify that well enough to begin with. But Joel, over to you.
Well, I was going to say this is a safe place to practice these ideas and to learn. What I want to do is pick up where Nick left us off by going from project leadership to enterprise leadership. And the important point here is we're not saying that project management is not important, but we are challenging that as the only thing. And the place to start, I'd actually like to begin with the very roots of project management. If you go to any project management certification program or literature, they always go back to the Manhattan Project and certain other World War II era projects as the roots of project management. And in fact, what you see here is an article, is from an article called Lost Roots in the California Management Review, which went back to the roots of project management, where in fact Gantt charts were first developed and used. The interesting thing, though, that they note is that the project had all sorts of unknowns. And in fact, the Gantt charts were primarily to keep the bureaucrats off their backs to say they knew what they were doing, when in fact they didn't. And I point that here because really, when you're leading a large-scale science and engineering project, there's 2 very different mindsets that in the culture. You heard Coach McGraw talk about building a culture. You need a mindset of folks who can be efficient and effective in delivering in the face of the challenging known parts of your project. At the same time, you need to be agile and adaptive to deal with the unknowns, including what are called the unkunks, the unknown unknowns. And so what we're going to talk about at the enterprise level is how do you create an enterprise that does both? And let's start with what could possibly go wrong. We produced this chart for you, which we thought you might enjoy. This is just, you may have some post-traumatic stress looking at it, but a list of some of the things that can go wrong in a 4, 5, or 10-year project, whether it's ownership struggles or sponsor swish, tests of nerve. I like the sudden depth scare as you suddenly realize you're in for the deep, and all of these other things set against time where you define, plan, implement, and sustain a project. And the question is, how can you set up an enterprise that will survive these and the many other stress points that we know will happen in a large-scale science and engineering project? Now, there's many parts of enterprise leadership that we could talk about. I'm just going to focus on one that you highlighted as particularly important to you, which was how do you do feedback and continuous improvement? And when we asked you in the survey, we said, how good are you and how important and difficult is it to adapt a research project to changing circumstances? Virtually all of you said it was important. And some of you said it was hard, but some of you said it was not that hard. And if you look at the difficulty scores down below, particularly those that have had many small and medium projects said this was not very hard at all. You do this all the time. Similarly, when we said, well, how are you at flexibility and agility? Everyone said it was important. Some said not hard at all. Those are these bright spots that are green on the right. Some said it was difficult, but again, most of you said it was not that hard on a scale from 0 to 10. Here's what's interesting. We then said, how about ensuring efficiency and effectiveness? Now, I've done lots of work with industry. In fact, I helped Ford and the UAW over a couple of decades develop what became the Ford production system. And that was all about efficiency and effectiveness. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But you actually said this was much harder to do. Most folks in government, military, or industry will say this is what they do better. It's the agility that they worry about. I think as researchers and scientists, building a disciplined continuous improvement culture is actually what you're saying is harder. So we thought we'd give you a couple of thought starters on that. Here's the most important first one. This is a hypothetical dart game, and I'll ask you in chat just to say who has the higher score, that is the most darts closer to the bullseye. Obviously, it's not a full dart competition, but the one on the left or the one on the right. And if you're counting, you'll pretty much see that the one on the left actually would have the higher score in this round. But here's the key question. Who would you rather coach to improve? If you said to the one on the left, go up a little or go down a little, you'll just get more noise, whereas you know exactly what to say to the one on the right. And so the first lesson about an efficient, large-scale enterprise is that you need to reduce the variance before you can improve. I'll say it again. You need to reduce the variance because it's hard to improve a highly variable system. And so you need to ask yourself across your research enterprise, what are the sources of variance and how much control do you have of them? Here's the same point from the point of view of R&B blues. Wilson Pickett famously said, first you harmonize, then you customize. You literally get everyone in your project on the same page, then you can allow variation, but you first standardize, then you improve. How do you standardize? The classic model, Dr. Deming advanced this, they still give out the Deming Award in Japan every year, is a cycle of plan, do, check. He says act, I use the word adjust, but the PDCA model goes against the typical pattern that most folks do, which is plan, do, plan, do, plan, do, without taking the time to do the check and adjust. And to push it even a step further, there's a size of paper called an A3 in Europe. It's about an 11 by 17, so a big piece of paper. And in a continuous improvement enterprise, literally everybody has the authority to complete an A3 on the improvements that are needed. You don't have to use this exact template, but the idea is, does everyone in your large-scale research project have a template on which they can make improvement suggestions and prompt that PDCA plan, do, check, and adjust cycle so that continuous improvement is distributed across the enterprise? And that really leads us to a question of culture change. The work that I did with the Ford production system was truly a dramatic change. Literally, the iconic mass production system had to become a flexible, adaptable, lean enterprise. And in that journey, what we ran up against, and you will run up against this, I'm sure, is deeply embedded assumptions in the culture that you're operating in. At the beginning of this workshop, a couple of you said, well, what about reverse incentives that promote individualism? Well, what we want to say is, let's go back to 1960. Douglas McGregor said there's two kinds of management: theory X, which is people need to be monitored and controlled, and theory Y, people need to be trusted and supported. He said, if you tune your ears in a meeting, within seconds, you'll know which assumption is in play. And once you know that, you know everything else about how that meeting is going to go. Is it going to be monitoring and control or support? Ed Schein, who worked with him at MIT a generation later, said culture change isn't what you have visible. It isn't your stated policies. It goes below that to these deeply embedded assumptions. And just to give you a kind of sense of it, if you are leading a large-scale enterprise, what deeply embedded, unstated assumptions are in play? Someone new is brought in and someone puts their arm over their shoulder and says, look, here's how things work here. In the case of work with Ford, for example, there was a deeply embedded assumption that a problem becoming visible is a career-ending event. And there's a famous moment in 2006 when there's a new CEO, and Ford was projected, as we were moving into a national recession, a global recession, to lose billions of dollars. And he said, why is the chart of red, yellow, green progress reports all red, yellow, and green? I don't see any red, yet we're supposed to lose billions of dollars. And a week later, in the next progress report, one of the direct reports put up a chart that had a red circle on it. Everyone held their breath thinking, oh my gosh, this is the end of his career. But the CEO said, great, let's get all these people around this afternoon and help you with that red circle. And of course, he became the next CEO. It was changing the embedded assumptions to a view that problems are to be shared, not contained. And you can see there's some other assumptions here, just as thought starters, emphasizing this notion ultimately that is the transformation the job of leadership or the job of everybody? What kind of a culture are you creating? And that's the last thought that I'm going to leave you with. Nick talked about the importance of a memorable true north vision. So here's an example from industry. This happens to be from Kaiser Permanente and the Coalition of Healthcare Unions. They have an elaborate partnership structure, and they wanted every person across the system at every level to be able to say, what is our true north? The patient or their members as an HMO, they have like 6 million members, is the centerpiece, with best quality, most affordable, best place to work, and best service as, in a sense, what they want everyone to remember as they do their literally thousands of continuous improvement PDCA initiatives every year. You don't have to draw a compass necessarily with your version of these words, but you should challenge yourself to say, can you have a visual or a way of communicating so that everyone on your large scale project understands what True North is? And that's the beginning of the culture change that's needed. So I'm going to pause there. We're about to transition, and I don't think we have time for Q&A. I think we want to move right into our next piece. And I see Sherry Lassiter is with us. I'm delighted with that. This is a kind of an unusual thing. In a lot of the survey responses, we had people saying, we're hearing you about stakeholders and metrics and all this other stuff, but what about the science? And so I reached out to my brother, who's a physicist of some renown, and asked, would you please join us to tell us a little bit about being a scientist who then, in fact, has to think about large-scale science in the way that we're talking about it. He was about to join us, but about a week ago, actually was hiking in the mountains and fell. And yesterday, he discovered that he actually has some broken ribs that he has to get checked out. So instead of him joining us in person, he made a video. We had planned to have him and the president of the Fab Foundation, Sherry Lassiter, who works hand in glove with him in the ways that we're describing as project leadership. Sherry is with us, and so she has some things to share. But first, I will share with you a video that Neil sent so that we can at least have the benefit of what it looks like from the point of view of a scientist.
Hi, I'm Neil Gershenfeld. I direct the Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT, first created as an NSF ITR large award. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today, but you're in good hands with Joel and Sherry. So I'm happy to take credit for the observation that computer science was one of the worst things to happen either to computers or to science. And by that, what I mean is it was created with the fiction that you can separate bits from atoms, hardware from software. I've come to appreciate, I worked once removed with the students at von Neumann and Turing, Marvin Minsky and Andy Gleason. And through that, I came to appreciate these pioneers of computing ended their lives studying not digital, but how digital becomes physical. Von Neumann studied how self-reproducing automata can communicate a computation for their own construction. Turing studied morphogenesis, how genes give rise to form. And breaching that boundary is what led with an interesting group of colleagues to writing the CBA proposal. And over the years, we've done things like the first significant faster than classical quantum computations, Grover's algorithms and Shor's algorithm, first observation of left-handed materials, introduction of mesoscopic scattering to create physical one-way functions, cryptography and materials, universal logic and microfluidics, record-setting discretely assembled materials. We were part of creating minimal synthetic genomes, part of early stuff on what became called the Internet of Things. All of these things didn't easily fit between computer science and physical science, and also couldn't be done as a single investigator award. They needed these really interesting, diverse teams to accomplish that. So in addition to the research, we hosted events to help explore these emerging ideas. One interesting one looked at the boundary between science and science fiction, so science and Hollywood, and that led to the creation with the National Academies of what's now called the Science and Entertainment Exchange to put popular science into popular media. Another kind of output has been people. My student Jason built and still runs Facebook's computers. Rafi built Twitter's computing, then went on to lead the reboot of computing at the DNC. There's a lot of press recently for the work Amanda and colleagues did on unlocking historically locked letters. Manu gave a popular TED talk on a 50-cent microscope to democratize microworlds. Max created a billion-dollar unicorn Formlabs to provide widespread access to high-resolution 3D printing. All of these people were outliers. They didn't fit, and CBA created not just the infrastructure, but the culture and environment where they could fit. So to do this work, we needed tools, and at the heart of the proposal was putting together one of almost everything to make anything. And so in a well-equipped research university, all of these tools would exist, but they'd be separated by discipline or length scale. We wanted to bring together the means to make and measure from nano, meso, micro, macro to explore this boundary of digital and physical. Once we had all of these tools, we had a problem. It would take a lifetime of classes to learn how to use all of them. And so we started a class called How to Make Almost Anything that's been swamped with students. It's turned into one of the most oversubscribed classes at MIT. It's grown to multiple labs at MIT and even a Harvard lab for the MIT class to accommodate that interest.
And notice that the draft.
So then with NSF, when we started looking at broader impacts of this work in society, rather than tell people what we're doing, we thought it'd be interesting to give them the means. So in between the millions of dollars of research investment and the research roadmap up to a replicator, we put together Fab Labs, about $100,000 investment, a few tons, fits in a large room, set up one of those in inner city Boston, and then had an unexpected, you could call it an accident. They went viral and spread all around the world. So there's over 2,000 of them in 125 countries in a range of underserved communities, unusual environments, providing access to emerging means for digital fabrication. So to keep up with that, we had to spin off a number of things. A Fab Academy program, where instead of teaching a class to hundreds of students, I teach it to hundreds of labs. That grew into Fabricademy on textile technology, a Bioacademy launched with my colleague, George Church, to do the same thing for biotechnology, not online education, but distributed education. Fab Foundation, Sherry will tell you more about. A Fab City initiative. On the right is Barcelona's mayor starting a 40-year countdown to urban self-sufficiency with the means to create locally. On the left is a mobile Fab Lab we set up outside the Oval Office in the Obama administration in the first White House Maker Faire. And that's led, among other things, to legislation to create a national Fab Lab network with the goal of universal access to digital fabrication in the national interest. And this is about to be resubmitted in Congress. So if you look at the scaling, upper left is Gordon Moore's original data. In the middle is 50 years of Intel mainline scaling. Lower left is 10 years of Fab Lab spreading, and they've been growing exponentially, something that's come to be called Lass's Law after Sherry Lassiter. We tell that story in the book on the right, Designing Reality, written with Joel and our younger brother, Alan, who led the biggest video game studio. Looking at the research is really filling in how to scale 1,000 million, billion, trillion for digital fabrication. And then rather than waiting 50 years for the impact of that, how you can shape it today. And Sherry and Joel can tell you much more about that. So best of luck with your proposals and with the programs to come.
So needless to say, thank you, Neil. And I was going to say the dress that he was showing was actually a dress that somebody designed to keep your personal space. But here's somebody who is a physicist who spent his life worrying about the science and has now become an enterprise leader on an extraordinary scale. Not only the first working quantum computer, but a roadmap literally in 40 years to make the Star Trek replicator based on programmable materials. But in our leap to large, we don't expect all of you to do a project that leads to a bill in Congress or 2,000 instantiations of your ideas like Fab Labs around the world. But we do want you to think about the enterprise. And with that, I'm delighted to have Sherry here, who is going to take us through a few of her thoughts as the person that is, in a sense, carrying on the responsibility to lead the Fab Foundation that is hand in glove with the science. And Sherry, it might even be good to tell people a little bit about your background before you're done as well, because that gives us a clue as the kind of person that a leader of a large might want to hire to do what you do.
Thank you, Joel. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you here today. I just want to say that this interesting constellation of brothers, meaning Joel and Alan and Neil, have been extraordinary to work with. And they have really taught me and continue to teach me as we build the scale and the impact of the Global Fab Lab Network. And so you've got a really wonderful mentor right here in your midst. I just want you to know. At any rate, I was a science journalist when I started. I was a producer, writer, director for public television. And my my beat was science and technology, specifically at first around medicine, and then it sort of grew from there. But when I came to MIT to work with Professor Gershenfeld, it was really in the role of not only telling the story of science, but also helping to develop and promote the science and technology that was being developed there. But the storytelling is incredibly important. And so as you think about your projects and your broader impacts and your broader participation, telling the story is an incredibly important part of it. Now, as Neil said, in about 2001, we started this project, the Center for Bits and Atoms, and I was very fortunate to be there right at the beginning. It was my first job in academia, and I was involved in writing this very large grant. And so I did get to see from the very start how you build a very large vision and how you implement that right over the years. So at CBA, I started out working with Professor Gershenfeld, and And then in 2009, once this global Fab Lab network started to get too big, we spun off the foundation outside of MIT to support the growth of this global network. And so in the Fab Foundation, in addition to in addition to just telling the story and growing the network, we disseminate some of the science and technology from MIT, from the Center for Bits and Atoms, into this global network. And we also try to apply the science and technology in ways that make good social impact in the world. So that's what we do. As you can see, this is this map of 2,000 Fab Labs in 126 countries. But if you add that to sort of all the makerspaces, innovation hubs, et cetera, around the world, you've got something on the order of like 8,000 to 10,000 labs across the world that share the same tools and processes and create this sort of infrastructure, as it were, that you can leverage to do distributed education, to do distributed sort of business opportunity, as well as make real impact across the world. So one of the ways we do this, and this is in education, is through this Fab Academy or Academy of Anything program that started from MIT as the How to Make Almost Anything class. We now have this whole portfolio. This portfolio is creating new opportunities, a Fab economy, as it were, for all of its students. So we've got hundreds of students approaching now in the thousands of students across the world who have taken this this class, who are now, we're connecting through a Fab economy project, trying to connect to different businesses that need these skills and this kind of a workforce, as well as creating sort of supportive environments for new businesses that spin off out of the Fab Academy or the Academy of Anything. And actually, just one more thing on that. So we're back mapping that to K through 12 as well, because these skill sets, in addition to the soft skill sets like critical thinking and problem solving and communications, we're also teaching everyone how the basic roots of artificial intelligence, of how you design and make new technologies, of those sorts of things. And so it's very, very important to workforce development in the future and towards supporting economic opportunity. And we pull those out when we write large grant proposals for this. So sorry, go ahead. The Machines That Make Machines is a project out of MIT. This is this Star Trek replicator roadmap that Neil was talking about. So we at MIT have designed kind of a platform for how you design and make digital fabrication machines. We've distributed that through the Fab Academy to the entire network. And so we have this very lively sort of community that is designing and building new machines and making businesses out of designing and building those new machines, which directly ties back to our research, because not only are we disseminating the research, but we're getting feedback from the network on how we're doing, how do these platforms work out in the real world, and are they making impact? So next slide, sorry, thank you. We are working with the National Governors Association on a roadmap for governors to follow, such that they can create the conditions for educating in these 21st century skills that I'm talking about for the future workforce. Right now, our education systems are really tooled for the 20th century and still thinking about manufacturing, et cetera, in very old-fashioned ways. And we see as part of our work to be sure that that we are looking at the future, and that our education systems are really tooled for this future workforce that really does have to have these highly technical integrated skills in order to participate productively in that workforce. Next slide. We proved, for many years, we talked about this idea of distributed manufacturing, of using digital fabrication to provide business opportunity. Our first time to really prove it at scale came during COVID-19. Hundreds and hundreds of makerspaces and Fab Labs around the world dropped everything and made PPE and created new kinds of PPE in response. I believe in the first 6 months, we counted 52 million PPE products that were made by this amazing community around the world that, you know, that shares the same tools and processes and vision. Next slide, please. Neil mentioned the Fab City project. We have 38 cities signed up to create this roadmap to sustainable living and sustainable manufacturing processes, the circular economy approach. That includes Boston, it includes Amsterdam, it includes Paris and Barcelona and many others. But what we do at the foundation is we try to really help these kinds of projects reach their potential because they have so much potential for impact. Next slide, please. We work with humanitarian aid all the time these days, not only with the sort of larger organizations like the Red Cross, but with these, especially with these new sort of agile humanitarian aid organizations by distributing the tools and allowing communities to be able to make what they need when they have a crisis locally. So we give them the tools and processes, they learn the tools and processes, they create economic opportunity locally, but they also are able to respond in an emergency or in a crisis to provide what is needed. Next slide, please. And then, as Neil was talking about, public-private partnerships. So we have been working not only with government agencies like the National Science Foundation or the Department of Defense, but we also are working with large corporations like Chevron, like Dassault Systems, like the GE Corporation, to build this kind of infrastructure across the country. And so really the National Fab Lab Network Act is aimed at democratizing access to this for education, for innovation and research and business opportunity, especially for business opportunity. And we are, our part of our work is to develop those relationships to support that vision. So, you know, whenever we write a large proposal, we can pull on the Fab Foundation and this kind of work to both meet the broader impacts and the broader participation sort of requirements and really push our mission forward at the same time. So that's that.
So needless to say, Sherry, thank you. Thank you for sharing with us, in a sense, the larger, broader impacts and broader participation that's come out of the science. We are close to time, but we do have time for one or two more questions or comments. Needless to say, we'd love to hear from you in terms of what would you like to know from Sherry about the role that she occupies as being hand in glove with the science enterprise, and now actually as president of the spin-off foundation that is further advancing the mission. So first, we'll see if Susan has any questions in the chat, but while we're waiting for that, Sherry, I wonder what you might say about just the process that you have for working side by side with Neil. He is all about the science. He has a bold vision, but you know, if you could give some coaching advice to the scientists who are participating in this webinar, who might be thinking, wow, I need to find myself a Sherry Lassiter. What do they need to know?
That's a tough question. I'm not sure. I would say that one of the things I do is I translate Neil. So if you are, you know, if you need someone to translate, that would be the kind of person that you want. So I can tell the stories, but I can also communicate to the non-scientists, to the non-academics, kind of what we mean. And so I think that's part of my value as a communicator is that translation and the storytelling. As I said, the storytelling is super, super important. And I would also say that do not underestimate how important broader impacts and broader participation is to the government, to everyone right now, especially in this particular environment where equity has become super important. You really, really need to pay attention and be sure that you're not just glossing it over with, that part of the proposal with just sort of words that, fulfill the requirement. The government is very serious about equity and very serious about how we can broaden participation across the world, across the country, sorry.
No, and that actually in 2 more sessions is exactly the next workshop ahead. I know we are at time. Anything from Susan, Nick, that you're seeing, or should we just move to wrapping things up? You're muted.
How is the foundation funded?
We are fee for service, basically, so we don't have a largesse. Some of these grants, provide some funding for our projects or for us. But mostly what we do is we find funding like from corporations or from government agencies or foundations, but really in the service of doing a project. And it's sort of the fees that are, kind of what we would call indirect fees that really pay for us to survive.
Joel, we have a number of questions on the Q&A, but I think we're up against time right now. We're out of it.
Certainly, Sherry included a link, and so she's delighted to hear from you. But I really want to thank you. Thank you for joining us and appreciate this additional dimension of leading a large enterprise. With that in mind, John, let me hand it back to you just to help us for a very quick look ahead. First, we had a couple of comments from the survey that we wanted to lift up. You're muted.
Unmuted. Basically, we're probably going to try to do next time early is deal with some of these things that have been backing up. Some of the questions that have been raised, they're very good questions. Now, you might notice that next week's talk is about data management, and you may be staring with a blank stare at the data management requirement in the proposal. So we're going to deal a little bit with that, but we're really going to talk about data leadership. I mean, one of the things that we said was that all of these sessions kind of regress on leadership. So there's a leadership dimension to data. We're going to talk about that too.
Super, thank you. And by the way, one of you did ask a question about I-Corps. I'm actually went through one of the early I-Corps programs. And what's interesting is that they don't train the PI to be the entrepreneur. They train the doctoral students of the PI to launch their spin-off businesses. And certainly when you heard Neil's talk, there's a whole diaspora of former students that are, the output of that research. And so for the one after data, when we talk about people, one of the themes will be broadening participation and fostering a diaspora of talent in society. So with that, I would like to thank you. Thank you for joining us for sessions 4 of Making the Leap to Large. It's a delight to have you here. There is a LinkedIn network that is forming. There's over 150 people that have joined. And the NSF is seeing you as an emergent community of practice of folks who want to lead large-scale research. We are here to help. Take good care.